What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some Baldur's Gate 3 news following the panel from Hell just yesterday on December 14th, followed by the launch of patch 9 onto the early access build. So, a lot to cover here, but I did want to mention something at the beginning of the video. This is actually the last major update they're planning until the release of the game next August 2023, which means what early access is right now is pretty much what we're getting until the game actually releases. And we'll talk more about that towards the end of the video. Patch 9 is a substantial patch. It adds a lot of major things people have been asking for, but also, noticeably, doesn't include a few other things. But the first thing I want to talk about is that the level cap for early access has been raised to level 5, which if you're unfamiliar with D&D 5th edition is a really big deal. Raising that level cap to level 5 will touch basically every aspect of the game in some way, largely because level 5 is a very important milestone for character development. It gives your melee characters their multi-attack, your spellcasters get access to level 3 spells, meaning that everything that level 5 entails has to have been added into the early access, which it has, and also adjusting a few of the enemies to account for the new Paladin class. But more than anything, I'm just glad that they're taking the time to actually test all of this stuff in early access finally, as a lot of the gameplay that opens up as a result of it is a big deal, and I think it was pretty critical to get that tested before launch. Now, next up, I want to talk about the Paladin a little bit. That said, I don't think I need to explain the class much. They are the Holy Avenger, the Holy Knights, at least in most cases. And like every other class, we're given two choices for subclasses with a third hidden one, which we'll talk about in just a second. Our two regular subclasses are Devotion and the Ancients. Paladins in 5e take an oath that they have to uphold, which gives them their divine abilities. The Oath of the Ancients gives you some healing abilities, and leans into more of a support role. Devotion is kind of your more stock standard paladin, being a righteous warrior, and they get some subclass features that allow them to deal extra damage or deal damage while also being defensive. But paladins are great because they are incredibly versatile, being able to do pretty much anything you need them to do in some capacity. However, I did mention a third hidden subclass. This is actually pretty cool, and I think it implies a lot outside of the Paladin class, but it is possible to be an Oathbreaker Paladin, and in order to do that, you have to make your Paladin and then break your oath. This will lead to a unique scene where you can choose to become an Oathbreaker Paladin in a way that is very much so in line with roleplay, and I'm a huge fan of the way they implemented this. This is very cool. However, what I'm a little more interested in is what it could potentially do for the rest of the game and classes. You see, they said that the way they've done it now, they're going to keep it open to player feedback. If they get a lot of feedback saying people would prefer to pick it at character creation, then that might be the way they go, though I have a feeling most people are going to enjoy this. But also, it makes the Paladin the only class right now with 3 subclasses, and a hidden one no less, which could potentially lead to more features like that for all of the other classes, which I think would be some really cool secret stuff to hide, if you will, for the main release of the game. I think that would be really, really cool, and while obviously I don't have any details of that, the idea of that is very cool to me, and I hope they run with it. Another thing about Paladins is that they are very much so a reaction-heavy class, meaning that they have a lot of abilities and things like that that trigger off of a reaction. And if you've played BG3 in early access, you might know that the reaction system is a bit lacking, or at least it was, because patch 9 overhauled it. And the quickest possible way I could explain it is that it is now very reminiscent of Celasta's reaction system. However, they do provide a bit more UI support in this regard, as every one of your characters has a reactions page now, where you can open it up, see every ability or skill they have that can be used as a reaction, and then you can set that up to either happen automatically, provided the conditions are met, or you can force the game to ask you and let you decide whether or not to use it. Which sounds like a small thing, but when you're talking 5e in particular, it's a very important feature, and having it represented in-game is a big deal, and it's going to go a long way, especially for classes like the Paladin that rely on reactions pretty heavily. Now let's talk about some other stuff. As I mentioned, it's a large patch. There is a lot of other stuff that was included in this, mostly minor, tons of bug fixes as well, slightly rebalancing things as I mentioned, adjusting various things, mostly what you'd expect from early access, but nothing really worth going over in a list format. But I wanted to double back to what I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and that is that this is the last big update that we're going to see before release. And while I think this is a fantastic patch that honestly changed the way the game feels, it feels more complete, like it's approaching release for starters, there are still some things that are missing that now are almost guaranteed to not be tested by the public. Though it is worth mentioning that it will of course be tested internally by QA teams, and while I hope that works out for the sake of everyone, CRPGs in particular are known to struggle with that internal QA testing because not having it released to everyone makes it very difficult to track a lot of this stuff down, just because of the size and scope of CRPGs. So things like the rest of the game, the Dragonborn, the Monk, we don't really know much of anything about that stuff in terms of how it's going to look and play, and while I am all for things being a surprise for launch, I realize they don't want to necessarily throw everything they've got at it for early access, and they want to hold some stuff back. But now that we can definitively say that what's here is pretty much what we're getting until release, I do think it's worth pointing out that there are still some major things that aren't here, which I mentioned because I'm as excited for this game as anyone, and I hope the lack of publicly testing a lot of this stuff doesn't dampen the experience for the actual launch. That said though, that's pretty much all I've got for you. I will drop a link to the patch notes down below if you want to read them for yourself, and I'll probably drop a link to the actual panel from hell as well if you want to watch that. All of that said, I certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you're playing patch 9, by all means let me know what you think about it down in the comment section below. Let me know what you're excited to try, what you're excited to see for the launch of the game. But it looks like it's finally within striking distance, so to speak, and I am really looking forward to covering this game in its full state, though it's still a little ways off. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but truly, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.